Communism is totalitarian, just like Nazism and Fascism.
Ready.
Socialism is totalitarianism. Communism equals dictatorship. Marxism is murder. Now, what the hell am I talking about? Well, it's simple. But first, why am I even bothering to mention this in the first place? Well, there are a lot of wannabe socialists, trendy commies, and edgy fascists these days, especially amongst younger people, both social justice warrior revolutionary types on the far left and the ethno-nationalist or national socialists, then in other words Nazis, on the far right. I, and many people I know, discuss and debate politics with endless numbers of these people on the far left and the far right, and in my experience, these people tend to get very upset if you point out what I point out in this video, so be sure to share it with these people. Far right and far left collectivists, that is, National Socialist types on the far right and Communist types on the far left, think of each other as opposites, and in a sense, they are. If we squash the entire political compass into a binary system, as most people do, and think in terms of just left and right, then one is the opposite of the other. But a map like this isn't very useful. In order to be useful, a map has to have at least 2 dimensions. So looking at this 2-dimensional political compass map, we could see that collectivists, or authoritarians, on both the right and the left are the opposite of individualists or libertarians on the left or the right. By the way, please see my last video in which I discuss these 1-dimensional, 2-dimensional, and even 3-dimensional political maps. But let's move on. Now, these are facts, demonstrably so. I'm talking about the fact that whether you are far right or far left, if you're a collectivist or an authoritarian, you are the opposite of an individualist or a libertarian on the right or the left. In other words, you're in bed. Whether you are far right collectivist or far left collectivist, you are together in opposing individualists or freedom. Now, these are facts, but these facts are vehemently resisted by the regressive left social justice warrior commies on the far left and far right ethno-nationalist national socialist types. So it's fun to throw it in their faces. So again, make sure you post this video or just share it with people who are either far left or far right and watch them get angry. It's so much fun. Now let's get technical. In Marxism, you have socialism, that is a system, or a dictatorship actually, in which workers collectively own the means of production, in other words the economy, rather than private entities, leads to communism, in which there are no classes, no money, no government, because the government is no longer needed because, you know, somehow everyone will become saints. Somehow no one will have greed, no one will covet anything, no one will try to attack anybody or rape anybody, even though supposedly masculinity is supposed to be toxic, and if you're born male, you're inherently evil, or if you're born white, you're inherently evil, but somehow in communism, that will somehow be wiped away through magic. And apparently no one will want to have things or have more things by working harder because property is theft, you see. And somehow a workers' utopia is not just a quasi-religious faith. Yeah. Let's reiterate. In the system of Marxism, first you have a revolution, then you have a socialist government, in other words a dictatorship, and then after everything's equally distributed and everybody becomes saints and nobody needs to have police to protect them from anybody else, you have communism. Communism technically has no government. Do you believe in the workers' utopia? You believe in a system in which there are no police because police are not needed and everyone is equal. That's communism. To quote Vladimir Lenin, Marx said that the revolutionary dictatorship of the proletariat lies between capitalism and communism. And that's just the orthodox Marx model. First you have feudalism, then mercantilism, then capitalism, then socialism, and then communism. But to go from capitalism, or more specifically late-stage capitalism, to socialism, there has to be a revolution and then a dictatorship to safeguard against the inevitable counter-revolution and also to forcibly take private property from everyone and to redistribute it in quote-unquote Theory, that is. Though it is not strictly correct to do so, in this video I will sometimes use the terms Marxism, Socialism, and Communism interchangeably as they are so in common parlance. But to be precise, capitalism is supposed to lead to the workers' revolution, after which the dictatorship, that is a socialist government, is installed to prevent a counter-revolution and to take private property from people by force and to redistribute the private property to achieve equality of outcome. Then, when everyone is equal and no one uses money and everyone lives in peace and no one would ever try to harm anyone else, there will be no more police and no government at all, a workers' utopia. A utopia, of course, means no place. It's platonic, idealistic, a fiction, a fantasy, a religious faith. Utopia is nowhere and no when. It's high in the sky. If, as Marx said, religion is the opiate of the masses, then faith in workers' utopia, that is Marxism, is the opiate of the asses. Here's a diagram that I made, folks. In my diagram, totalitarianism is indicated by the largest shape. This contains three subsets, or three forms of totalitarianism: Nazism, Fascism, and Communism, indicated by the three ovals. These three are not identical, hence they are delineated as three different things, and yet they overlap because they are all dictatorial. They necessarily involve dictatorships. They are all totalitarian, and they are all dictatorships. Let's talk a bit about this term fascism, which is being overused, to put it mildly, these days. The term fascism is commonly used in four different ways. 1. The strictly literal sense, as in Mussolini's fascism in Italy or Franco's fascism in Spain, both in the early 1900s. 2. The looser sense, meaning dictatorial or totalitarian. 3. The very loose sense, meaning people or things that have totalitarian tendencies, even if merely slightly so. So you could say, my father is a fascist, he won't let me do blah blah blah. 4. The extremely loose and erroneous sense of the word, currently used by the far-left social justice warrior Antifa crowd, by which they mean anyone or anything that is not as far left as they, or anyone that they don't like. To elaborate on number 4, the extremely loose use of the word fascism. It seems increasingly the term fascist is used by the far left, Antifa types, social justice warrior types, etc., to indicate anyone that they don't like or anything that is not far left enough. The heretics, the infidels, that which doesn't pass the politically correct purity tests, that which is not strictly adherent to their orthodoxy of political correctness. Of course, this coinage is counterfeit or otherwise valueless, so I shan't be using these terms in these uselessly loose senses. In common parlance, the word fascism is mostly used in the second of these senses. It is synonymous with totalitarianism. In fact, the terms dictatorial, fascist, and totalitarian are pretty much interchangeable. Hence, that which is totalitarian is dictatorial or fascist. Communism, being totalitarian and dictatorial, is fascist. Communism is fascist in a sense, in a common, though imprecise sense. To be precise, communism is totalitarian and dictatorial, just like fascism and Nazism. It's not significantly different, okay? And by the way, all of these lead to mass murder. In terms of death count, communism is many times worse than fascism and Nazism combined. Make sure you tell any communist you encounter that. Watch them lose their shit. If you discuss communism with its proponents, you often hear them say the formulaic, real communism has never been tried, to which one can correctly reply, no, it has been tried. Many times. It's failed every time. And when communism is tried, millions die. It is true. No government has gone from the workers' revolution to a socialist dictatorship and then to a withering away of the government into a workers' utopia. That's never happened. So yes, communism has never actually been tried. That's because it doesn't actually result from the socialist dictatorship. You know what results from dictatorship? A continuance of that dictatorship, or a revolution and then, a new dictatorship. Communism has been tried, it's just never gotten past the dictatorship phase that is supposed to lead to communism. How juvenile, how naive, or how insane do you have to be to believe that a dictatorship will voluntarily wither away? And by the way, Marxist quote-unquote theory is incorrect, and it's not even a theory in the scientific sense. In scientific terms, it is a hypothesis which has been disproven at best. You see, Marx hypothesized that as the dialectic of history evolved, feudalism leads to mercantilism, which leads to capitalism, which, once it's reached its late stage, gives way to socialism, which then, when the state withers away, gives way to communism. A utopian world in which no government is necessary, in which there are no classes, no private property, just happy workers, all equally poor, but equally fed and equally housed. But socialism did not arise from late-stage capitalism. That is, in the most advanced capitalist economies, as Marx's quote-unquote theory predicted. It arose instead in Russia, which was hardly even 1 foot into the industrial age, let alone late-stage capitalism. Theories or models that make predictions that fail lack what is called predictive power. In other words, they're not useful. They don't work. Marxism lacks predictive power. It is not useful. It doesn't work. Hopefully it needs not to be said that Marxism/socialism/communism is collectivist and authoritarian. It considers people to be mere atoms of a class or some other group, rather than as individuals. The upper classes are all guilty of exploiting the lower classes, that is, every individual member of the upper class partakes in the collective guilt of the entire class. Newborn babies are guilty, for example. People who have never actively oppressed anyone are guilty because they exist, and they deserve to be oppressed or murdered by Marx's dictatorship of the proletariat. Folks, communism is totalitarian, just like Nazism and fascism. Now let's have a deeper look at this term, dictatorship of the proletariat. Karl Marx wrote, quote, "The class struggle necessarily leads to the dictatorship of the proletariat. This dictatorship itself constitutes no more than a transition to the abolition of all classes and to a classless society," unquote. In The Dictatorship of the Proletariat in Marx and Engels, 1987, Hal Draper writes, quote, "The phrase dictatorship of the proletariat first appeared in a series of articles by Marx, later titled The Class Struggle in France 1848 to 1850, published in what was then Marx's own London magazine. The first article, written in January 1850, came off the press in early March. The expression or its equivalent appeared not once but 3 times in each of the 3 installments or chapters that comprised the original series. To quote Leon Trotsky, quote, "Repression or the attainment of economic ends is a necessary weapon of the socialist dictatorship," unquote. Trotsky again, quote, "The road to socialism lies through a period of the highest possible intensification of the principle of the state. Just as a lamp before going out shoots up in a brilliant flame, so the state, before disappearing, assumes the form of the dictatorship of the proletariat. That is, the most ruthless form of state which embraces the life of the citizens authoritatively in every direction," unquote. Vladimir Lenin, quote, "Whoever expects that socialism will be achieved without a social revolution and the dictatorship of the proletariat is not a socialist. Dictatorship is state power based directly on violence. And in the 20th century, as in the age of civilization generally, violence means neither a fist nor a club, but troops. To put quote-unquote disarmament in the program is tantamount to making the general declaration, we are opposed to the use of arms. There is as little Marxism in this as there would be if we were to say we are opposed to violence," unquote. So in other words, they're not opposed to violence. You have to embrace violence if you're a socialist, and you have to embrace the dictatorship of the proletariat. And by the way, the dictatorship of the proletariat, that's like saying the People's Republic of China or the People's Republic of this or that, the other thing. It's obviously not going to be of the proletariat, it's going to be of a new class. Basically, in 1984, the Inner Party. Quoting Lenin again, quote, "Dictatorship rule is based directly upon force and unrestricted by any laws. The revolutionary dictatorship of the proletariat is rule 1 and maintained by the use of violence by the proletariat against the bourgeoisie. Rule that is, unrestricted by any laws," unquote. But I'd like to end off with a great quote by the social philosopher and I'm going to say comedian Bertrand Russell. I think he's very often hilarious. Quote, friends of Russia here think of the dictatorship of the proletariat as merely a new form of representative government, in which only working men and women have votes, and the constituencies are partly occupational, not geographical. They think that proletariat means proletariat, but dictatorship doesn't quite mean dictatorship. This is the opposite of the truth. Unquote. Folks, dictatorships suck, whether they are left, right, or whatever, okay? Fuck communism. Fuck socialism. Fuck Marxism. Hey, don't click off this video yet. I want to tell you that my best and most controversial videos are not available on YouTube, and I want to tell you how to see them. Things are changing for controversial content creators like myself. These media monopolies like Google and specifically YouTube, Twitter, Facebook, etc. do not want us. They don't want us to say what we say, to expose what we expose, and to make the waves that we do. So they take more and more measures to make us give up. They pander to the far left, the regressive left, the social justice warrior, politically correct crowd who accepts, well, demands the censorship that these companies want us all to accept, or which force us to accept. To make a long story short, you should, like myself, expect my YouTube channel to disappear any day now. By all means, please subscribe to me on YouTube and click that little bell icon, and do the same for my backup YouTube channel, Justin Fidel. But please subscribe to me on Speak Out, formerly called BitChute, and on Minds, where you can find my best, most controversial videos. By all means, friend me, follow me, etc. on Facebook, but I want to encourage you to use Minds or Gab or something else instead of Facebook and Twitter, etc. Scroll down and see the links to all of my channels and social media accounts. Also, see the Facebook group Womansplaining with Tabitha for Womansplaining with Tabitha videos and lots of photos and videos of the lovely Tabitha. I also want to tell you that I will no longer use Twitter because Twitter requires that I delete a bunch of tweets before I can do anything else, and out of principle, to set a good example, I will not do that. To make a long story short, I got into a Twitter war with the famous rapper and rabidly racist Talib Kweli Green, embarrassed the living snot out of him, and well, for the long story, see the video below. Alright folks, until next time, truth, honor, personal integrity, reason, responsibility, peace, love, freedom, equal opportunity, and individuality. Thanks for watching.